You're listening to the I'm Busy Being Awesome podcast with Paula Engebretson, episode number 212. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. This week is part 2 on our series all about fun. And I got to tell you, I am so curious to hear what you have discovered thus far. So last week, we explored why it is often quite challenging for so many of us to make time for fun in our lives, which can seem a little bit surprising on the surface. But then we also talked about why this actually makes a whole lot of sense, that so many of us do struggle with this, why so many of us have a lot of stories and judgments wrapped up around the idea of fun and play and rest. And with that in mind, we also explored some different questions in last episode to help you uncover what your specific stories and beliefs are around the idea of fun and play. What does it mean to slow down and make time for fun? Do you have any judgments of it? Do you actually enjoy yourself when you do slow down for fun? Does it come naturally, or do you get a lot of resistance from your brain? And from there, we then dove into the process of identifying what we like to do for fun. Because again, so many of us struggle to know what we actually like to do for fun generally. We've been so focused on getting things done or taking care of everyone else, or we simply haven't been able to get off the hamster wheel of hustle that we've essentially forgotten what it means to have fun or what we like to do for fun. And so last week, we went through this exercise where we used the categories of self-care and relaxation, physical activity, connection, creativity, and travel and adventure to help us brainstorm ideas and create a list of fun activities to do. Now, if you haven't had a chance to do that yet, no sweat. If your brain is thinking, oh no, I missed it and I should have done it and now I can't continue, don't worry. You're good. Be careful of all or nothing thinking that your brain may be saying you should have done it already. Instead, I invite you to take a breath, grab a piece of paper, and then write down one possible fun thing that you would like to do in each of those categories right now. Okay, so grab a piece of paper. If you're driving or if you're biking or something, please do a mental note instead. But if you can, grab a piece of paper, a slip, whatever's laying around, or use the notes app in your phone and write down one thing that could be fun in the category of self-care and relaxation. Maybe it's reading or playing solitaire or listening to a podcast. Next, think of one activity for connection. Maybe it's getting coffee with your sister, or you're calling up a friend, or you're going to book club for the month. Then think of one potentially fun thing for physical activity. Maybe it's learning how to rock climb. Maybe it's going for a walk. Maybe it's dancing to your favorite pop song. Maybe it's horseback riding. Next, consider one fun thing when it comes to creativity. Maybe you're signing up for a ceramics class, or you're sewing something, or you're trying a new recipe. And then finally, I encourage you to think about one fun thing for travel and adventure. Maybe it's going to the science museum, or you book an Airbnb for a weekend getaway. Whatever sounds like fun to you. Now, as you're making this list and you're finishing it up, I'm going to pause here and go on just a little tangent to highlight what we're doing right now in real time. So it is really easy for our brains to want to wait to do tasks like this, right? To create our list of fun things. And we do this, I think, because we tend to believe that we need to really make it this big thing and we have to do all of it. We have to do it perfectly. Again, this all or nothing comes in. So we're thinking, well, if I'm going to sit down and really do this, I have to do it quote unquote right. So I need to light candles and get out my journal and play relaxing music and have at least 30 to 60 minutes devoted to the practice. Now, you can do this if you want to. If you have the time for that and the space for that, amazing, go all in. But also, don't use that against yourself. Because the truth is, you could also take 1 to 3 minutes to brainstorm a handful of ideas and let that be plenty. Let that be exactly what you need to get started having fun. We've talked about the concept of doing B or B plus work on the podcast before, right? And for those of you who might be new to this idea, it's essentially a way of thinking about that saying, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. We don't have to get an A plus all the time. In fact, quite often a B or a B plus level of work is way more than enough. Now, I know for sure firsthand that this is a tough concept. It is for myself. I'm sure it is for many of you as well. And many of us have really tried to essentially overcompensate for the obstacles that we face with ADHD by overperforming and perfecting and constantly tweaking to try and keep us safe. So again, it makes sense that we don't want to release what feels like a really supportive habit of perfectionism. But if we can be gentle with ourselves when we keep this understanding in mind of, oh, well, this makes sense. Perfectionism did serve me at different points in my life, but also maybe I don't need to hold on to it so tightly. Perhaps I could find a safe place to explore the concept of doing B or B plus work in a way that feels good for me. You could even use it with this podcast and with the different challenges I offer you on this podcast. Heck, let yourself show up with C or C minus work and show your brain how simply showing up and listening and doing C minus work, whatever that means for you persistently, is so much more effective than demanding A plus work for yourself, never having time to do A plus perfect work, and then get started on it. B plus work out the door is a heck of a lot more impactful than A plus work that never sees the light of day. And I encourage you to start practicing with B plus work as often as possible. I think about that with this podcast, actually, and the work that I do. I think I mentioned maybe a month and a half ago or so that I decided to start recording my podcast so that I could share them on YouTube as well for people who are more visual learners and people whose brains do better when they're watching something rather than just listening. Now, are these videos perfect? Oh, heck no. No, they are nowhere near perfect. I do not have fancy editing. I don't have fancy lighting or anything. I am literally talking into my microphone while looking at a computer camera. That is it. Now, will I ever get fancier with editing and new cameras? I mean, maybe. But what I can tell you for sure right now is, as somebody who's doing all the recording and editing myself, this is good enough. I'm not going to let perfectionism stop me from getting a video out there if it could help somebody who learns better by visually watching something than strictly listening. I'm not going to let the demand for all the perfect lighting and camera editing and all of those things stop me from getting that work out there to help someone. And I invite you to do the same in one area of your life. Again, maybe it's practicing the things we talk about right here on the podcast. Think of one area in your life where you can practice this. What if you released the demand for A plus work from the belief that you have to do all the things perfectly, and you instead let yourself do enough? Again, if we think about the podcast as an example, rather than telling yourself you have to do all the strategies and all the ideas on the podcast, I don't think anybody really does this, but we'll use it as an example. I have to listen to all the strategies and ideas and implement them all before I go on to the next episode. Oh my gosh, please don't do that. Instead, what would it look like if you tried to focus on one sentence or one idea that stood out to you the most that week, and you explore what it would be like to implement that one thing throughout the week? What if that was more than enough? I promise you, you are going to see such a huge impact by taking that B or B plus work, by following through on it rather than demanding A plus if I have to do everything perfectly and then never getting around to starting with it. Okay, I'm going to get off my soapbox now and get back to our regularly scheduled programming. Hopefully you have a few ideas that could be potentially fun for you to explore, because today we're going to dive into the question of how do we actually schedule this time for fun? How do we make time for fun? Because for most of us, When we're living with such full schedules, we'll find that we're going to have a lot more luck when we intentionally set aside that time rather than simply hoping it's going to happen. So, step one of the process that we've talked about in last week's episode was creating that list of fun activities that we might want to pursue. Now, step two in our three-part process is to figure out what's in the way of actually doing these things right now. So we want to identify the friction. So to help us uncover what's getting in the way, I invite you to ask yourself that very question. What is getting in the way of me making time for these fun things right now? Why am I not calling up my friend to chat right now? Why am I not horseback riding right now? Why am I not reading that book from the library right now? And I'm saying right now, I don't mean right now in this very moment, but right now within our daily activities. Okay. What is getting in the way here? And remember, we're asking ourselves these questions from a curious place, not a judgmental place. Okay. We're asking to genuinely understand what the answer is. What is in the way here? We're seeking to find the sources of friction that keep us from moving forward on these things that we genuinely want to do. And sometimes that friction might end up being so small or just really inconsequential. Now, the brain, when we pause to think about it, might want to judge that. We might want to go, oh my gosh, that's it? That's what's getting in the way? Notice that? And instead, we're going to turn back to curiosity because in reality, when we find that the friction is just a really tiny thing, that's amazing because then we can easily adjust for it. For example, I was just thinking about this question for myself with horseback riding. So horseback riding was one of the first things that I really wanted to do once I got back to Minnesota. So I used to ride horses a lot when I was younger, but I haven't since my early 20s. And I've always wanted to get back into it. And now I live in an area where I have several stables within easy driving distance, but I haven't moved forward on this plan. And I was thinking, well, that's interesting. That's something I really wanted to do for fun. So I stopped and I asked myself, what is in the way here? What is the friction? And I realized that, well, first of all, my weekends have been really busy since I've moved home. I've been unpacking and doing family stuff over the last several weeks. And it's only now over the last week or two that I've had the capacity to even think about finding time for horseback riding. And now that I am thinking about it, I've realized, again, in real time, as I'm talking through this with you, I've realized the few times I started looking into horseback riding, none of the stables that I found online had an official website. They're just listed as businesses in Google, and a couple of them have reviews. And for my brain that loves researching everything ahead of time, that is a source of friction. Because I can't research all the ins and outs of the stable and decide ahead of time what questions I need to ask based on what I learned when I don't have a website to research. So instead, I know now, as I'm talking this through, I just have to call. So I'm realizing that the steps to move forward to call and figure out about horse stables and riding are, first of all, choosing 3 stables that are closest to me. I'm then going to identify the questions that I want to ask. I'm going to write them down so my brain doesn't forget them. And then I'm going to actually schedule time to make these calls. In fact, it is Monday at 3:28 p.m. and I am going to schedule the time for me to make the call tomorrow in my body double session. I always hold these body double calls with any of my clients on Tuesdays so that we can get done those things that we've been putting off. And that is when I'm going to schedule these calls. So I have that extra support to pick up the phone and call these stables. So that's my plan. So now that I've identified the friction and I've created a plan, I can actually move forward with making time for horseback riding. Honestly, if I hadn't have slowed down to find this friction literally in real time with you here, I probably would have kept horseback riding on the someday list for quite a bit longer, rather than something that I'm going to be pursuing within the next couple of weeks. So I invite you to take a moment and think about some of those fun items on your list. Look at them with curiosity. Ask yourself, what is in the way here? Is there a logistical obstacle? Is there a timing issue? Are there fears or worries involved? All of these answers are absolutely acceptable. They all make sense. And best of all, we can totally solve for all of them. Again, it might require some logistical things or problem solving. We might need to ask for help. We might need some coaching through fears or worries, but we can absolutely solve for all of them, which is awesome news. And the first step for all of that is figuring out the friction. Okay. So now that we know the friction and we're ready to move forward because we know how to move through the friction or remove the friction, it's now time to actually schedule time for fun. This is step 3. Now, I know this might seem silly. Scheduling time for something like fun might seem like the opposite of fun for many of you. But as I mentioned earlier, we all have pretty busy schedules, and many of our brains are prone to working and taking care of everyone else first. So it's really important that we're intentional about making time for fun and play and rest, at least at first, until it becomes a more regular part of your lifestyle. And honestly, for those of you who have a brain more like mine, it might be something that you will always do intentionally. Because again, I know for myself, it's much easier for my brain to fill open space with things that it automatically labels as productive rather than fun, quote unquote productive. If you were watching the video, you saw me do scare quotes. I don't make this mean anything about me, that my brain is going to try and fill things with quote unquote productive things. Instead, I just use that information to inform how I schedule time for fun, right? It's not a big deal. I just know, oh, my brain's going to try and create busyness instead of time for fun. So I want to intentionally create downtime and fun time in my schedule. Not a problem. So how do we do this? What do we do? So the first area for us to explore is one that I like to look at frequently with my clients. And it's the question, how much flexibility do I want in my schedule? What level of structural support feels really good for me? Because again, every brain is different. And every brain requires a different level of structural support. So you can ask yourself, do I like to use a high level of structure and support that has a lot of specificity and the decisions are already made? Do I like a lot more flexibility with room to kind of weave in the fun whenever the opportunity arises? Is it somewhere in between those two options? What level of scheduling feels really good for me? And today we're going to talk about 3 different approaches to scheduling time for fun that kind of speaks to these different levels of structure and support. So as you listen, I encourage you to notice which examples feel the most supportive for you and your current situation right now. Which ones sound like they might be a great fit for you and your brain and the type of fun that you want to incorporate in your life more often? And which suggestions have you kind of pushing back and you're thinking, oh, that sounds terrible. Okay. Make note of that because again, there's no right or wrong way. We just want to uncover what feels best for you in this current season of life. So the first approach I want to talk about is what I call creating a fun menu. And I think this is a great approach for people who want a little bit more flexibility in how they schedule time for fun and play. And really what their biggest friction point is actually making a decision about what they want to do when that time for fun arises. So for example, maybe you have a schedule that's pretty predictable. Maybe you know your kids go to school every day and on Thursdays, that's your fun day. That's the day you take off. So you know that you have 4 or 5 hours of fun, relaxation ahead of you before you need to head back to school and pick them up on Thursday. But what often happens for you is you find yourself spinning, trying to decide what you want to do in the moment. And all of a sudden, that beautiful pocket of 4 or 5 hours disappears. You never choose an activity, and then it's time to pick up the kids, right? So if this sounds like you, then the fun menu could be a really great option. And the best part is if you've already created your list of fun things that we talked about in last week's episode, step 1, you're basically done. So essentially what we're going to do here with this approach is create a list of fun activities or projects or classes you want to take, things you want to do, people you want to see, whatever. All these things that you'd like to do over a specified amount of time. Maybe it's over the next 2 weeks or over the next month or over the next quarter. These are the things that I'd love to do. Then, whenever those predictable pockets of time open up, all you have to do is open your menu of fun things and choose the next thing on the list. Decision made. Or maybe you look at the list and you ask yourself, well, what sounds like the most fun right now? Connection, self-care, movement, creation, adventure? Go to that category and then pick the top thing from that list, whatever fits your best timeline or something. So the beautiful thing here is that we're really reducing demand on your executive functions. You don't have to make a bunch of choices. Instead, you just pick the thing at the top of your list or the one that fits your schedule the best with the amount of time you have, and you get started. Decision made, time for fun. Yes, please. Now, if you're a person who can easily spin indecisions, I would also recommend making your menu quite small when you're getting started. Maybe you have one, maybe two options in each of these 5 categories. Or maybe you limit your categories to 3 or something, creating and connection and self-care, for example, and you have just a few options in each of those. So that way you have many less options overall to distract or overwhelm your brain. In other words, rather than making the Cheesecake Factory menu of fun, we want to have a fine dining menu of fun with a few options you know are going to be good. Okay, so that's option number 1 for people who like a looser structure and just need some help narrowing down decisions. Create a fun menu. Option 2, to help you schedule time for fun and play and rest, is really great for people who like to do activities with specific dates and times attached to them. It's also great for people who have super busy schedules and also for people who want more structure in their lives generally. So this approach is creating a biweekly or monthly or quarterly plan. So for example, if many of the ideas on your fun list focus on time-specific activities, maybe you love to attend concerts in the summer, or you take a lot of community ed classes, or you love to volunteer with different groups, or you and your friends like to see live comedy whenever comedians come in. Having an approach of creating a bi-weekly or monthly or quarterly plan can be really supportive. So just as it sounds, what you do is you pull out your calendar, whether it's digital or paper, and you mark off the dates ahead of time for the different shows or the events you want to attend, the classes you want to take, the things you want to do, etc. This helps to ensure that you're blocking off the time, and it's giving you this bird's eye view that helps ensure you're doing this planning more intentionally. So it helps that you don't double book yourself with seeing a show on the same day as your family reunion in August. And of course, you can also do this for non-date specific things too. Maybe you have a really busy schedule with a family that has a lot of things going on, but you also know you want to intentionally save time to read the books you got at the library on your last library run. So you decide, okay, Thursday after work and Sunday mornings, those are my reading times. Block it off. Do that. I love that. Okay. Use this scheduling approach in a way that works for you. And with that in mind, I also love this bird's eye view approach because it helps you to pace yourself as well. You can check in and see how often you're doing things and when you're doing them. Maybe you look at the calendar and you realize, oh, that's interesting. I have 4 or 5 things back to back, 5 nights in a row. And normally my capacity is 2 nights in a row. Do I want to keep this? Do I want to space it out? Do I want to move things around? Maybe, maybe not. But that bird's eye view is giving you the choice and you have awareness of it. Or maybe you're on the other side of the spectrum where I tend to hang out, which is, gosh, I haven't done anything fun outside of the house in a very long time. And I don't have anything planned all month ahead. Maybe I should adjust for that, right? I do want to aim for one fun thing per week out of the house. So what do I want that to look like? How can I create a few more things outside of the house that are fun in my calendar for the month that feel like a full body yes to me? What does that look like? Right? So using a schedule like this can really be helpful because Many of us deal with time blindness. We have a hard time seeing and estimating how long things are going to take and how much we're committing to. And having that visual representation of activities and commitments can be a really valuable tool to both ensure that we're making time for fun regularly and that we're also doing it sustainably without overcommitting ourselves by accident. And then the third tip that we're going to look at today to help with scheduling time for play and fun is using digital supports. So whether you make the most of the digital apps that are already built into your tech, the calendar app, the reminders app on your phone, whatever, or maybe you like more advanced apps and task managers and things like Todoist or Asana or Google Tasks. Whatever it is for you, using a digital app can also be really supportive in a couple of different ways. So first of all, as a task reminder is meant to do, it can help you remember specific events that you have coming up. And then second, it can also act as a reminder to make time for the less time and date dependent activities that you might want to do regularly, but you find yourself pushing off or just forgetting about because our short-term working memory means out of sight, out of mind. Let me give you some examples here of what this would look like. So with our first reason, you might use the reminder app on your phone, or you might set up recurring reminders on your digital calendar to send you a notification or ping you the day before an event, and then maybe 30 minutes before an upcoming event. Or maybe you signed up for a watercolor class at the library, but it's not for a month or so, and you need to bring your own supplies. So in this case, maybe you use your task manager or your reminders app to send you an alert a few weeks out before class so that you order the supplies, you have them on time, or you have enough time to go to the craft store so you have them for class. And then you could also use the reminders again to go off the day that the class is happening and then the day of. So that's one way that probably you may already be using these task managers and apps to help you both be prepared for and attend the fun things that you plan for yourself. Now, on the other hand, let's say that I wanted to make more time to read books from the library, like that last example I mentioned. And my goal is to carve out a few minutes most days of the week. Now, there's a lot of flexibility here. I'm not saying 30 minutes, 6 days a week. I'm saying a few minutes most days. I just want to read a couple of pages a day, as many days as possible. Or maybe I want to finish a crochet project I'm making for someone's birthday. So I have a timeline here and I want to work on it pretty regularly, so I make sure I get it done on time. In situations like this, you might use a digital reminder in a slightly different way. So in this situation, you could choose a handful of different prompts and set them as reminders to go off on different days throughout the week. Maybe on Mondays, you have a reminder that goes off at noon and it says, "What time do you get to read today?" And then on Tuesday, it says, "What are you excited about reading today?" And on Wednesday, it might say, "What time are you going to crochet today? And do you have all the yarn you need?" Something like that. Or maybe you keep your questions more general and you have a few prompts that go off throughout the week, like, "What are you doing for fun today? How are you taking care of yourself today? What fun things are you looking forward to doing today?" And by scheduling these different questions to appear, maybe at your lunch hour or after work, whenever it would work best for you to make that time for fun, you have that gentle nudge to remind the brain, "Oh yeah, I did want to make time for working on my calligraphy," or "I did want to see if my neighbor wanted to go for a walk at the dog park after work. I'll give her a call at lunch." Having that little nudge can be really useful for those of us who, again, struggle with our short-term working memory, and these fun things can quickly fall into out of sight, out of mind category. But when we use technology to our advantage, we can give our brain that little reminder of these fun things we do want to do. And when we intentionally set aside time for them, it becomes even more likely that they're going to happen. So, as a quick recap today of all the things we've explored around making time for fun, we first want to make a list of things we want to do for fun. Get that list of options front and center so you're not forcing your brain to think of things and make decisions and take action all at once. Okay? Do yourself a favor, get that list in front of you. After you have your list of fun activities, then check in with yourself. What is the friction that's in the way right now? What is blocking me from doing this now? And how can I solve for that? How can I remove some of that friction? And then finally, carve out time in your calendar to make that fun thing happen. We all have very full schedules. And if we want to make time for fun, it's so important to be intentional about that. So check in with the level of support and structure that feels good for you, and then play around with any or all of the options that we explored today. Whether you want a lot of flexibility in your schedule and you create your fun menu, so you have all the ideas at the ready, and whenever that free time opens up, all you have to do is open your menu and there it is. Whether you create more structure and intentionally schedule activities with that bird's eye view of the weeks or the month or the quarter ahead, or you use an app or your digital calendar to set aside time on a regular basis so you don't have to think about all of it later. All of these can be super supportive for you in making more time for fun. And as always, I would love to hear what's working for you. So please head over to Instagram. I am at I'm Busy Being Awesome, and leave me a message on the post for this episode or drop me a DM. I can't wait to hear about it. All right, my friends, that's going to do it for us this week. And if you're ready to take these concepts deeper and apply them to your life, if you're ready to learn how to support your ADHD in a way that works for you, then I invite you to check out today's show notes or head to I'mBusyBeingAwesome.com/group to learn more about my small group coaching program, We're Busy Being Awesome. If it sounds like a great fit for you, add your name to the waitlist and you'll be the first to know when enrollment opens for the next cohort. Also, have you grabbed the podcast roadmap yet? It has the most popular episodes all detailed for you, so you can get yourself up to speed and ready to work with your ADHD brain. You can grab it now through the show notes or head to I'mBusyBeingAwesome.com/map. Until next time, keep being awesome. I'll talk with you soon.